Malena Annable. Welcome to Tech Talk with Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, it's been challenging to conduct the usual extensive research I perform before each interview because you have virtually no online presence. But then again, you were featured in 2 documentaries that captured the day-to-day life at your workplace for several years, so I wouldn't exactly call that stealthy.
True. I tend to prefer to have a low radar. I guess that's the way that I've always been, is that I just want to be low on everyone's radar and just kind of get my work done and do my thing. Being off-site means sometimes you can be overlooked and forgotten. But with the pandemic and everybody having to conference in to meetings, I've been more involved. But yes, Double Fine has captured me in my day-to-day life. The 2-Player Productions folks are just really wonderful human beings, and I trust them. So I feel totally fine being filmed by them and participating in whatever they choose to put out.
But let's rewind a bit. When did you realize that the games industry is your calling?
I'm not sure that happened for me, to be totally honest. What happened is I was making television commercials in Minneapolis, and I hit a wall. I was frustrated with a lot of things, and I felt like I needed to go and do something different. So I moved to California. I didn't have a job lined up, but I talked to a friend who was working at ILM, and he said, "Oh, I know some people at LucasArts. They're looking for somebody to be in the sound department." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds cool." Because, with the television, we had done a lot of, doing the recording of the audio tracks as well. It had been involved in some of that stuff. And so I was like, well, maybe I know about this. And the sound department at LucasArts was at that time made up of Michael Land, Peter McConnell, Clint Bajakian, and, among others. And they grilled me. And asked me so many tough questions. And I loved it. And I thought it was great. And they called me back for a second interview, and they said, "Yeah, the guys want to have a picnic with you." And I was like, "That sounds cool. It'd be really relaxing." And I think I took one bite of my sandwich. They just kept asking me more questions. And I joined that group and really was excited to be a part of that company, and just the interrelation, how do I phrase this? So many different parts all have to work together in order to make a game happen. And it was really fun to go from a company that had 10 employees to LucasArts that had, I think, over 300 at that point. So it was just figuring out how all of the different groups work together and how things were made. I was a sponge soaking up information. And I think I've always been fairly decent at organizing chaos. And so I guess in that way, it was my calling, because there's a lot of chaos and you have to be okay with that.
So the picnic was an official part of the interview process, right?
Yep. I just thought it was going to be casual. Like, hey, we grilled you the first time, but now let's see if you're a nice human being. But it just kept going with a lot of tough questions, and it was great. I loved it.
But did they actually ask you any audio-related questions?
I'm sure they did. But that was over 25 years ago, so I don't remember.
So when exactly did you start working there?
I started in September of 1999.
And what was your first day at LucasArts like?
Well, I had started a week earlier than they thought I was going to work, so I didn't have a computer. And I got lost on my way out of the building at the end of the day, because it was a really, confusing space. I didn't remember how I had been led from the front lobby down into the basement, like the ground floor, lower level where the sound department was. And I couldn't find my way out at the end of the day.
So you made a great first impression, right?
Yep. Lost in the maze.
And did they ask you to play any of the LucasArts adventure games during your training period?
Nope.
Did they ask you to play any LucasArts games during the training period?
Nope. They just said, here's a backlog of stuff that needs to get done.
So what was the first project they assigned you to, LucasArts?
Well, the sound department is unique in that it's almost like a service bureau that works on every project, including Lucas Learning projects as well. So at that time, Force Commander was in production, probably Jedi Power Battles. I'm sure a Lucas Learning game. My gosh, I'd have to look at, a timeline of those games and when they came out to know what was in production. But my job at that point, I was the sound department coordinator. So I mostly just, kind of did administrative things within that group to make sure that they had everything that they needed. I managed, we had a recording studio. I managed who booked time with that and making sure that, any musicians that came in, all the sort of administrative paperwork kinds of things that needed to get done. I loved it. I mean, I learned a lot by just watching what the sound designers and the composers were working on. And just, I was also the emissary that got sent out of the department to the production group, had weekly meetings. And so I participated in that, would listen to everything that was going on, at a higher level within the organization. And then I would bring that back to them and just send out an update and let everyone know, what was going on sort of outside.
So not project related, but more company related? Yeah. And do you remember the first game you were credited on?
I think it was Force Commander. Pretty sure. I think that was the first one that came out.
It was Anakin Speedway.
Oh! Okay, good. There you go.
At the time, you were working on several Star Wars projects, with Anakin Speedway being the first to be shipped. Given that Lucasfilm has very strict rules when it comes to the Star Wars franchise, did they limit you in any way when it came to sound?
Well, me, no, because again, my scope at that time was really more kind of administrative project management kind of stuff. No, I wouldn't even say project management because that implies that I was on a specific team. And no, my interactions at that point were truly just talking to the other, sound designers and the musicians and maybe the other sort of middle managers, in the other departments who were sort of my level. We would, get together and find out kind of how things were going, what's happening in the voice department, because that was a separate department. It's I didn't feel that there were any limitations necessarily, but that's because that was outside of the scope of my role at that point, which is different now. But back then, I mean, I was much younger, just starting out my career.
So did your role include any technical tasks?
I built databases. I had to manage a lot of there was a lot of sound gear that had just been accumulating. And, at that time, product software was, you had to have a product dongle. And, so I'm crawling around in all of everybody's equipment racks. I'm trying to get serial numbers and I'm trying to get everybody updated and upgraded. And I wanted to set a gold standard for all of the software and hardware that we used within that department. And that just meant, digging through years of not a lot of great record keeping. And so, it was, it was less glamorous. It truly was just me crawling, under desks and using a flashlight to find serial numbers.
But in addition to the Star Wars games, you also worked on a Monkey Island game and an Indiana Jones game.
Yeah, so the Monkey Island game was really great, and it was a fantastic experience because I up until that point I had been working on games that were already in production, and so I was less clear on what was the process for pre-production and sort of early game development. And I got to know Sean Clark fairly well at that point, and I just started going to those like more of the team meetings and just sort of paying attention to how is it that the different disciplines have to work together in order to, make a game. And because of that interest, that's ultimately what led me to leave the sound department and join the production group so that I could get that whole view. Because until that point, everything was much more narrow and focused just on the audio side of things. And I was curious. I wanted to know how it all got made.
Escape from Monkey Island has the monkey combat section, if you remember. And in that section, there were 3 unique monkey sounds that were playing in a loop. And so if I want to complain to anyone about the fact that there were only 3 and that section of the game is really long, are you not the person I need to complain to?
No, that would be, I'm going to say Clint Bajakian.
Okay, because I got Mike Stemley for an interview and I complained to him about that fact, but he told me to approach the sound people.
Okay.
So I'm approaching the sound people, and now you're sending me. This is like calling customer service.
Well, if you can get Clint, then he will have so many fantastic stories.
Clint.
Okay. I have to say that being a part of that sound department at LucasArts was really incredible because Mike, Pete, and Clint had known each other for a long, long time. And instead of feeling like, sort of excluding others, they made me feel like I belonged. I moved to California. I still didn't really know a lot of people, but I feel like they gave me roots and they made me feel welcome. And I'll never forget that because, it just made me feel comfortable. And I feel like I've taken that approach with everything that I've done since then. It's like, how do you make people feel comfortable? How do you make them feel welcome? How do you include them in decision making and whatnot? So, I love those guys. They're fantastic.
And as the sound department coordinator, did you deal in any way with LucasArts' iMuse system?
Not really, because it wasn't really being used at that point. It had been phased out. I think
Escape is the last adventure game which used it, but probably not in the same manner as they used it in the games that were done using MIDI. Yeah. But they still used it in a way. So
yeah, it was a cool system, but like most things, it's really hard to keep software up to date. And, when you're writing your own, it's hard because you're developing it and you're also trying to keep it current and use it. It's tricky.
And with Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, it seems that you're not credited on the Windows version of the game. You're only credited on the Nintendo 64 version. Now, I know that there were several improvements that were made to the Nintendo 64 version, but apart from having sequenced music as opposed to pre-recorded audio, I couldn't find any differences in the audio department. So,
an oversight? I have absolutely no idea. I don't really remember.
No, because the PC version was released in November 1999. So since you started it in September, I guess that version was already ready for shipment.
Probably,
but
yeah.
My question is if there were any changes made to the Nintendo 64 version that you were in charge of.
No, gosh, no. Again, I had only been there 2 months, so I at that point, I didn't do anything that made it onto like that game disc, right? I was mostly just supporting the people who were doing work that was represented on that game disc. So,
okay, fair enough. But I had a chat with Hal Barwood a while ago about RTX Red Rock, which recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. And in the game, you're credited in the special thanks section without any specific role mentioned.
Okay.
But as far as I know, you did work on that game.
I did work on that game. I was in the production department at that point. And I had been assigned to that game and Full Throttle 2. So I was supporting both of those projects. And then we hired somebody else who took over the assistant producer role on RTX Red Rock. So then I rolled off of that project. And I don't think I had been on it long enough to merit any kind of credit beyond special thanks. So that is why you don't see anything else other than special credits. But yes, I was initially an assistant producer on that project.
Now, speaking of Full Throttle 2, that was one of the games that was being worked on at LucasArts in 2003. Now, I want to show you some footage.
Uh-oh. I can see it. Oh boy, okay. I think I know what this is.
Okay. Now, we see some gameplay for Full Throttle 2, which is something pretty rare to find nowadays because only the trailer was officially released publicly. And so this is from E3 2003. Now, take a look at this part. Do you recognize that hand?
That's me.
Yup, that's you. And then Connors talking about something that's happening in the game. What were you talking about?
Gosh. You know what? We had a kind of a pre-figured out spiel, a speech that we were supposed to give. And I pretty much said the same thing each and every time. But I do not remember what it was that I was saying. I'm sure there's audio that would go along and tell you that. But it was E3, so it was all supposed to be pumped up. We've got this and we've got that and we've got all of these other things. And aren't you super excited for this game?
And so what was your role on that project?
I was an assistant producer on that project.
And how long were you an assistant producer on that project?
Until it got canceled.
No, did you start working on the project when it first got pitched?
Yep. Yeah,
really?
Pretty much like right away, as soon as it got greenlit, when Sean was working on it. And I think Ryan Kaufman was on the project and Chris Miles had started. And I think Kevin Schmidt. There were a few folks already on the team. Chris Miles. Oh, and Mark Overney. Yeah. There were a few folks that were kind of just incubating that project. And I joined that team to kind of, help keep things organized and come up with milestones and create asset databases and task tracking methods and things of that nature.
And what percentage of that game was already completed by the time it was canceled?
Oh, there was still a lot to do on that game. There was a lot to do.
And what were the reactions at E3?
Well, people were pretty surprised that it was not just your classic point and click adventure game. But this was also the time when, all games were a lot of games are moving into this 3D space and folks wanted, they wanted brawling and they wanted driving and they wanted this and they wanted that. And, we tried something new and different. It didn't sit well with fans. And also at that time, LucasArts couldn't really support, I think there were 4 projects in production at that time. And we didn't really have the staff to fully support 4 productions, especially as everyone was switching over to Maya and trying different game engines. And, if you can't build the underlying tech, makes it difficult to execute on a game.
And so the year after, in early 2004, Graham was still working on Sam & Max Freelance Police, while Full Throttle was already canceled the year before in August. Did it catch you by surprise that the same thing happened to Sam & Max Freelance Police, or did you figure out it was bound to happen given the state of LucasArts at the time?
That's an excellent question. And I feel like that, I feel like we knew there was a chance it could happen. But the Sam and Max game had made so much progress and was looking really good. And there was a lot of excitement for it within the studio. However, I think externally, it was a game that didn't maybe seem like it was going to be the AAA hit that LucasArts wanted its games to be, right? It wouldn't be this, massive bestseller because those kinds of games weren't really selling anymore. And so I think that, I guess that's why they canceled it. Or, the studio was going through like a massive shift at that point. So we shouldn't have been surprised. But at the same time, the fact that there had been so much excitement for it and, so much progress made, that was a real bummer.
So when did you leave LucasArts and what was the last project you worked on there?
I was working on episode 3 and was not loving it. Was actually pretty miserable at that point, just wondering like, maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe I should just leave games and go do something else. I had no idea. I did some soul searching and I just quit. I said to Graham, I got to quit. I got to figure this out. So he was like, okay, go ahead. And I quit. And I remember going into Brian Brandt's office, who was, he was a programmer there, and I'd worked pretty closely with him on some stuff. And he said, he's like, wait, come in, sit down, shut the door. Wait, you're leaving? This is bad. Why are you leaving? And I was like, I just don't know what I want to do with my life. And I don't feel like I fit in here. And and so the very next day, I got an email from Double Fine saying, we hear you're quitting, because the executive producer at Double Fine was married to Brian. And I had friends at Double Fine. I knew Tim, I knew Scott, Bagel, Raz, a bunch of folks. And so, yeah, I got this email from Caroline saying, we hear you're quitting. Would you like to come talk to us? And I said, why, yes, I would. So I interviewed with them.
Well, you may have quit, but you got your longest credit yet in the game, because on episode 3, you got credit for additional design, development, and management.
Really?
Yep. All 3. The trifecta: design, development, and management.
I'm shocked. I feel like all I did was just wrangle with LucasArts was hell-bent on having like a task tracking system, and they had purchased something called Alien Brain, which, they just also expected that it would just work out of the box, but it doesn't, because you have to tailor everything to your own specific project needs. But they didn't give me any programmers to do it. It was really frustrating.
They tried to keep you at LucasArts with this credit. See if it will make you change your mind. And it didn't. So.
Nope. I didn't even know this. I thought I was just special thanks on that.
Wait, you don't look yourself up on the internet, given that you don't have any online presence. The only presence you have is your credits for the games you've worked on. So
yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So you got an email from Double Fine the day after you quit. And how soon after that did you actually start working there?
Let's see. I think I had only a month off total. And so initially, I went in, I interviewed with Double Fine, and they were great. At that point, the company was small enough that you got interviewed by absolutely everybody in the studio, and you had to get like a universal thumbs up. And I guess I impressed them because they wanted to hire me. So that was great. But this was also at a time when, Psychonauts had been dropped by Microsoft, and they were trying to find another publisher. And Caroline said, well, I can't bring you in until I have a signed contract. I don't know if there was ever a signed contract, but eventually she just brought me in.
Did they take you out on a picnic as well?
No. Although Double Fine has a picnic every year. And so I
Really?
Yeah. I'm
Give us
surprised
the exact location.
I am surprised that hasn't turned up. Double Fine, we post a picture of it every year.
Well, maybe you are hiding pretty well in that picture.
I do hide.
And what was your official title when you joined Double Fine?
Associate producer.
And the first project you worked on was Psychonauts?
Psychonauts 1, yep.
And how far into production was Psychonauts when you joined the company?
It had been in production for a number of years. I think, let's see, that was 2004 when I started. And the company was founded in 2000. So it had been in production for 4 years. And so there was quite a bit that was done. There was still quite a bit that wasn't done. And we knew that we just had to get that game finished. And so when I came in, my number one job, and I would say this is still my number one job at Double Fine, is to get Tim to write. And so I focused on getting Tim to write the game, the remaining cutscenes, because at that point, when Tim starts writing and he delivers a script, I really consider that like those are the architect's plans, right? At that point, we know what it is that we have to build. And each discipline takes a look at that writing and pulls out different things that are important to them, right? Like for me, because I oversaw all of the voice production, I would say, well, these characters have speaking lines and how many? And so which actors do we need to get into the studio? The artist would say, oh, he wrote that there's a jet. I guess we have to model a jet. Each person sort of like figured stuff out, like, oh, we'll need special effects here, or we'll need this music here, or we'll need this, these sound effects there. And so again, it's like all disciplines pull out from that writing the information that they need in order to make it happen. And so I still feel like we don't know what a game is until we have that script from Tim.
What are your responsibilities as a producer before you receive the script?
Well, at that point, so I have done a lot that's, again, that low on the radar, hidden stuff. I built a database that manages all of those lines of dialogue, but it also contains all of the stage directions and any like voice acting notes, because it's important to have all of that, right? If you just think about all the different ways that you could say the word wow, and if you don't have any of the context, then you might just like pull any random voice file that says wow. But if you need it to be, excited or in awe, or it's, whispered versus shouted, you need to sort of have all of that information that's captured into one database. And so, we've had a number of different, we've improved the system as we've gone along. But I would call that like, it's just this sort of like narrative container, if you will. And each discipline who needs the information that they need can kind of come in and pull that information out. And so if you're an animator, you can, at this point, you can kind of select a bunch of stuff, right click, and, it becomes a cutscene stub that then you work on and you get all of the information that you need. We're working on better ways to, now that we've switched to Unreal, what are some better ways that designers who need to have like really specific logic, how much of that can we automate for them? Because there's a lot of devices that Tim relies on rather frequently of like, pick one of the following, or go down the list in order and repeat the last one, or go down the list and then never repeat again. Right. And so how can we kind of capture those little bits of logic and make it easier for whoever is implementing the dialogue to make that happen? So yeah, there you go.
And by the time you joined, did they actually record any lines, or did they start recording afterwards?
No, a bunch of stuff had been recorded, and unfortunately, it was a hot mess. I won't lie. There was no consistent file naming structure scheme for the stuff for any of the files. there was an attempt at having a file naming convention, but it wasn't adhered to. And so the first thing that I did is I scooped up as much of the audio files as I could find and just listened to every single one of them. And
really?
And I think I ended up doing that about 4 times total. I had to determine if something was scratch or professional. And we had one guy, John Stone, who was really good and sounded a lot like Steven Stanton, who was Sasha 9. So I had to really listen, sometimes get a second opinion. I had to determine if it was still a legit line because so much had been rewritten and thrown out and levels, just stuff had been, cut and whatnot. So then it was, well, is it still valid? Do I need to care about this? And then all of the sort of the good files, I had to then put them in a separate little pile. I had to rename them all, give them a brand new naming convention. Because for a while, Raz had the same character code as the Rainbow Squirts. That wasn't helpful.
Wouldn't it be easier to just re-record everything?
No, because the amount of money that it takes to have the actors come into the studio. And also at that point, we had a bunch of finished cutscenes. So if you bring actors back in, unless you're doing you're syncing to picture, which can take longer and then cost more money, we may as well just use the lines that we have. So I think it was the better option. And I think it just, all it taught me was that going forward, you have to have a better system in place and you have to find ways to, make adherence to that system be easy for people.
But at that point in time, was Tim still writing the script?
Yeah.
So why did you record any lines before the script was locked?
So typically we do that anyway, because we want, if Tim has written a bunch of cutscene stuff, right? We want to have pro VO in the hands of the animators so that they are doing their timing, their gesturing, all of that is to the final voice file. And we do that earlier because we don't want them to be blocked. Right. And we also we'll do a lot of scratch VO where we just record stuff ourselves and put that in. And that can help to a certain extent. But eventually we take a look and we say, we've got 2,000 lines here across X number of many actors. Let's just get them into the studio. Let's hear the actual cast actors at this point, so that we're not falling in love with the scratch VO, that we need to hear who the professional actors are. And we need to that will help inform the decisions that we make about these characters when we start to hear their voices. So for example, in Broken Age, who we cast for, oh my God, what's his name? Merrick? The wolf guy? Oh my God, I can't believe I can't remember his name. Anyway, his voice was not what we initially thought we were going for when we were doing the casting, but it was so good. It was so good. And then, we get those voice files back and you just, first it feels like progress, but it also, it brings that final layer in where you've got the beautiful art and the beautiful animation and you've got all these amazing things that are happening. And then you hear, the beautiful voice and it just comes together like a masterpiece.
And you talked about an experience in which the voiceover surprised you and it was not what you expected, but better. Now, I don't know if you know, but in Back to the Future 1, Eric Stoltz was cast as Marty McFly. And they were well into production for several weeks and they filmed scenes with him. And then the director realized that he was not fit for the role or he was looking for something else. And so they fired him and got Michael J. Fox and reshot everything. Did you have a similar experience at Double Fine where you got the voiceover after you cast someone and it just didn't work?
We have. It's happened on occasion, but it's not that. It's not so much, at least in the instance that I'm thinking of, it wasn't the actor. It was that the voice was too similar to some other characters that had been cast. And so, we look for a range of sounds, and the voices must be distinct and unique enough. And in the one case that I'm thinking of, it's just, the voice sounded too similar to another character. And if they were going to be speaking on screen to each other, it wouldn't be distinct enough. And so, it's not, in our case, it wasn't the actor. It was just that it wasn't quite right for the uniqueness.
You noticed that only after you started recording and not during the casting process?
No, because what's really interesting is when Chris Brown manages all of the casting for us, and she'll get a bunch of auditions and we listen to them, and you're having the auditions come back with just like a bunch of kind of generic lines, and you're listening for those kind of tonal audio subtleties, if you will. And someone can audition great, but then in the studio, it doesn't translate. It's such a tricky and finicky thing.
And so after you completed Psychonauts and cleaned up that mess, what was your next project?
After that, we moved on to Brutal Legend.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun.
How fun?
I think there were 40,000 lines of dialogue at that point, and oh my gosh, how fun was Brutal Legend? Well, it was challenging in that we were building an engine from scratch while we were trying to build the game, so that's not at all tricky. And then Tim needed to, it was such a great departure from Psychonauts into a vastly different world. And we all, we all had to wrap our brains around that. We also, at that point, we still had to be pitching to publishers and hope that somebody would sort of see that a game about heavy metal would be really cool. And, we went through a similar process again where we got dropped by a publisher and got picked up by somebody else, and it's stressful, and Tim was writing a lot of the campaign dialogue, but he hadn't written a lot of the skirmish dialogue, and he did finally write it over one weekend, and it was 24,000 lines of dialogue. It was a lot
in one weekend.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically it was 8,000 lines of dialogue, but since every single headbanger would have to say, since there were 3 or 4 of each character, it was basically times 3 or 4 of whatever he wrote. So it was a lot.
And how do you manage 40,000 lines of dialogue?
With a really excellent dialogue database. And I think that truly is the thing that has helped Double Fine stay so nimble, is that we, created this database, and we could know exactly if something has been, written, if it's if it got written by somebody other than Tim, was it approved by Tim? Because you think of any sort of pop-up text, things of that nature. Let's see, had it been professionally recorded? Is it a part of a cutscene? A lot of times you do things like the last line of a cutscene, you might change that to be the first line of interactive once the cutscene's over. So you have to be able to manage and move all of these things around, and you need to be able to edit it as well, the text string, and then mark it for re-record. And yeah, in a lot of ways, I feel like all I did was create a metadata system, right? So that the unique line code ID is the one true thing. And then even the spoken text, can change. That's just one little bit of metadata that goes along with that. So, yeah.
And why do you differentiate between dialogue that's spoken in a cutscene and dialogue that's in an interactive sequence?
Because different people would be using it. And so you need to, like, an animator, again, would then animate if it's a part of the cutscene. But if, during dailies, when we're looking at the cutscene and, we're saying, hey, you know what, actually, this might be better if, we end the cutscene here, we switch back to interactive, and the first interactive line is this line, right? That's a different person's job. And so at that point, it's no longer in this, Maya file, but it's a part of, a dialogue set that that a gameplay programmer would implement. And then once it's been implemented, in the game, at that point, if Tim was like, you know what, I want to rewrite that line altogether, it's the line code that still is in the game. And so he can change it. We can re-record it. And there's no more work that's needed by a gameplay programmer at that point. It just works because it overwrites it has the same line code ID. The new wave file overwrites the old one. And there you go. It's done.
And what happens in a situation when you have to, let's say, splice two takes together or edit a sound file that's already been recorded, but once you implemented it in the game, you saw that it may require a few changes, not changes that require re-recording the entire thing, but editing. So how do you manage that?
Well, again, those are the kinds of things that would, happen in dailies or in playthroughs or, and that would then go into a task tracking system. And we have audio folks on staff who would then take those files and do the necessary edits or changes. And sometimes it's, it's not just editing or splicing a specific file. It's, what, this read isn't good. Are there any alternates that we can take a look at? And we go back to the original session file. We find that the actor said that 3 other ways. Is there one that works better? Yes. Let's, edit one of those and overwrite the wave file in Perforce. Or, there isn't a better take. And so let's just mark it for re-record.
And at that time on Brutal Legend, you were also the localization producer? Or did you start doing that afterwards in later projects?
Well, no, I've done that. I did that for Psychonauts as well. And I think it was just one of those things that nobody else wanted. And because I was doing voice, it made sense. I was already so familiar with the script. And Double Fine is known for, witty humor and dialogue that isn't necessarily easy to translate. And so, having somebody that is really familiar with the script in its entirety and all of its like kind of quirky, maybe non-translatable things, that just fell to me. And then again, with this dialogue database system that we built, I then extended it so that it could support localization as well.
And as a localization producer, are you part of the decision-making process of choosing which languages the game needs to be translated to, which markets the game may be successful in or not?
No, unfortunately, when, we're developers and, it's the publishers who are above us who figure out, where are those markets that we should, where should we target? I have always felt like I would want to do as many languages as we possibly can. But again, that costs a lot of money. And I'm sure publishers are just looking for a return on investment and don't necessarily care about that. But one of the things that's so refreshing about Microsoft is that, they have this gaming for everyone idea. And that one of the pillars of that is localization, right? So you bring a game to somebody in the language that they speak. And so there has been a lot of support from Microsoft going forward to really expand the markets that we will go into. And that is super exciting for me. We did a little bit of that with Psychonauts too, where we did Chinese for the first time. We'd never done that before. And I'm looking forward to on future projects, just going into a lot more markets. So, but I can't say any details right now.
And how do you work with each localization company in each country? Do you have several companies that you work with, or you have one company that handles several markets? How does it work exactly?
Well, up until the Microsoft acquisition, we worked with one company. And again, I guess going back to that idea of what I learned from Mike, Pete, and Clint in the sound department of making people feel welcome, we worked with one company, and I very much I didn't want them to feel like contractors. I wanted to make myself available to translators whenever they had any questions about anything. When we would get to the point of doing localization QA, it's just a lot of my time goes into, really reading through their bug reports, and giving them updates from our side, so that, and I feel weird saying our side, but like, I tried to give them as big a window into development as possible. And it worked because, it was the same company going all the way back to Psychonauts 1. And even though, I would work with different people on project to project, I'd like to think that we had a really good reputation within that company, that we that we did good work.
And who does QA on the translated lines themselves to make sure that they're actually the lines that they were supposed to translate?
Well, it was that same company. So whoever, but different groups, right? So the translators translate the script, and then there was a QA department that would actually go through that, like play the game in context. And it was hilarious. There were some really wonderful moments, right? Like stacking had a reference to tossing cookies, right? Which is slang for vomiting. And it had been translated verbatim as like throwing cookies. So then, of course, there's a bug that gets written up that says, the text says throwing cookies, but he's actually vomiting. Please change. Please change. When you use slang in the script and send it to translators, do you usually translate the actual meaning, or you hope for the best, basically? Well, again, I really at the front, I say, Double Fine is known for witty humor and dialogue, and not all of that will translate. So I expect that you will make changes that are appropriate for the language that you're localizing to. And so, like, for example, in Psychonauts 1, after Dogen loses his brain, all he says is TV. And there's, some funny bits where Raz would just, if you, interacted with Dogen, Raz would say something, like ask a question where the answer would be TV. It was like, what's the country code of Tuvalu? TV. And so we got it sort of translated verbatim in French. And I went back to the team and I said, if you want the answer to be télé, then please rewrite the jokes so that the answer can, be the same. And they're like, we can do that. And I was like, yes, please do that. And again, I think with a lot of Lee Petty games, there's a lot of things that need to be explained. Especially stacking DLC. I did a deep dive on hobo culture in the 1940s in the US. And I said, here's some resources for you. Good luck. If you have questions about how to make this fit for your territory, and by all means, let's come up with a solution together. Rad was another similar thing. The Russian translator had a lot of questions. And I was like, well, these 80s commercials were big for us in the United States. Instant coffee, Maxwell House, good to the last drop. Is there a similar story in Russia for, an instant coffee that might have been big in the 1980s? And they're like, no. I was like, okay, well, I don't know.
So what do you do in that situation? You just change the joke? You remove the joke completely?
They weren't, I think we just sort of let it all stand. I think that those folks weren't quite comfortable, maybe, with making those kinds of changes. And so, again, I'm not going to push them to make changes that they don't want to make. And I think also for them, they just, they wanted to make their translations and like move on to their next project, perhaps. I don't really know. So, we strive to have every language hit the same quality bar as English, but there's only so much we can do. I mean, I don't speak all of these languages myself, so all I can do is just try to encourage and empower people to make it the best that it can be in those languages.
Now, in 2010, the game Puzzle Agent was released. Now, in my conversation with Graham, he mentioned that you played a lot of Professor Layton at the time, which became the basis for Puzzle Agent. So, first of all, thank you for that, because Puzzle Agent is my favorite Telltale game. And second, what were you doing playing Professor Layton on the Nintendo DS?
I really like puzzle games. I also like games that are fairly easy to pick up and set down. As much as I love working in really immersive storytelling, if I am, like if I'm waiting in, for the doctor's office or whatever, I just want a thing that I can do like really quickly. And they call my name and I'm like, done, turn it off and go. And so I don't like a lot of games that take me away from reality, but they give me a brief escape from reality. So that's what I was doing. And I just like puzzle games.
So you like casual games?
Yeah.
So how come Double Fine isn't making any casual games?
Oh, I don't.
Just for you.
I don't make those choices. I don't know. It's fine.
It's a big market.
I know.
I'll talk to Tim.
Okay. Yeah, you tell him.
Now, in 2012, the Double Fine Kickstarter launched, and it was one of the most groundbreaking Kickstarter campaigns, given that it reached $3.3 million in funding. And I think that it was probably the beginning of the adventure game renaissance that we're currently experiencing. Because after that Kickstarter, every game developer from the 90s started launching Kickstarter campaigns with spiritual successors of their games, like Space Quest and other games. Now, at the time, did you think that the Kickstarter campaign would be that successful?
No. Oh my gosh. I think it hit over $1 million in less than 24 hours, and we were just shocked. It was amazing. It really was amazing. I could not believe it.
And so were you part of the original pitch in which they told the team what the project may be in terms of scope? And then after the campaign was that successful, when did you decide to change it immensely from the original pitch?
Well, I mean, it's a Tim game, so there's always going to be some amount of it changing and growing. Tim can have an initial pitch, but the end game will have all of the kernels that he talked about in his pitch, but the path by which we get to the end result, is sometimes it's different at the end than what you think. So I don't know if there was ever really a conscious decision of like, well, now let's make a bigger game. It was just sort of like, wow, okay, Tim, he just got to writing.
And around the same time, you also worked on your first licensed game, which was Sesame Street Once Upon a Monster. How did the decision to work on a licensed IP come about?
So I'm trying to remember what's been like public and what's not here.
It was part of Amnesia Fortnite.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah.
So it was public.
Okay. All right. So there had been an Amnesia Fortnite project, and, it seemed like it really had promise. And I don't remember how we got paired up necessarily with Sesame Workshop, but it seemed like a good pairing. Again, I wasn't really a part of, that decision-making process, but worked with Nathan Martz and other folks who were writing and developing that game to, again, just, make sure that it was that we are using the dialogue database system. And then a lot of my interactions with Sesame Workshop and Warner Brothers at that point was about just making a script. They had a very particular script format that they wanted us to follow. And so, there was no easy way for us to do that, except with me doing it manually by hand. And so I had to do that for every script that we sent them.
And how is it to be the voice producer of a show that you probably watched as a kid?
At that point, you're so wrapped up in the day-to-day that you're not really thinking, oh, wow, this is Grover's voice or whatever. Also, there are different actors doing those voices, back then, than like even from when I was a kid. And so you're listening to it and you're like, this doesn't sound right. And it's right. It is absolutely like, that is the legit character role. But, for me, like there are so many small subtleties that I pick up in the voice that I listen to that, I can tell that it's different. I can tell when Richard Horvitz has a slightly stuffy nose. I can tell, I hear the things in those files that I think a lot of people don't hear.
And you also worked with Elijah Wood and Jack Black. So it seems that it's a problem at your household with being starstruck. You and Graham refuse to be starstruck.
Yeah, it's not, I feel like it's a little bit of a disservice to say it's a job, but we're all human and we're here on Earth to do the things that we're good at doing, or at least we're attempting to do the things that we're good at doing. And when you recognize, skill or craft or expertise in someone else, whether that's an actor or a mechanic, you give credit where credit is due. Like we've done a lot of work on our house, and I think our contractors are absolutely amazing human beings who have an incredible eye for detail, and I appreciate that. So I also, Jack Black is wonderful. And then when he goes off script and he's giving you back all these amazing, like ad-libbed files, like, my gosh, that's fantastic. And I love it. And there's a humor, and a level of sincerity about the work that, that he and Elijah and all of our voice actors do. Like, it's amazing.
In 2013, you got to revisit Brutal Legend because it was released for Windows. As part of the port for Windows, did you work on any major changes, or were there mainly technical tweaks?
I think it was mainly technical stuff. I don't think we made any other changes. Although, again, it's hard to remember. I think I'm the only person at Double Fine who's worked on every single project. And so I have a lot of things that are just going on all the time. So like I'd be working on Brutal Legend PC at a time when, something else, like when I've got maybe 2 other projects going on. And so I get into this mind frame of like, let me answer the questions that you have so that you can keep going. And now I got to go back to this other thing. So I don't think we did anything else for Windows that I don't remember.
In 2015, you started working on the Double Fine remasters. The first remaster you worked on was Grim Fandango. And as a game that shipped a couple of months before you joined LucasArts, it shipped at the end of 1998 and you joined it in September 1999. Were you aware of the difficulties that you'll face in the remastering of the game, given that you have to work with the original remaster, with the original master tapes and the original recordings? And it was the first project where you had to work with stuff that's been recorded in the 90s. So how was that experience for you?
It was hard. I won't lie. Yeah, it was really, I think that all of the remastered projects that we've worked on, what the big learning thing for me is, how do we get better about archiving so that future us, when we're remastering something, isn't like cursing and screaming, like things were not archived very well. And I get it. You're dealing with, tens of thousands of files. So not everything is going to be perfect. But it was really hard. I won't lie. There was a lot of, I consider a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis as a bit of a detective. It's like, there's a bug, there's a problem, we have a question, so it's like, I'm just following, I'm digging through and trying to find the information as best I can, to uncover and, sleuth my Professor Layton. I'm just trying to solve a puzzle. That's what I'm doing. And yeah, it was really hard. And in Day of the Tentacle, I mean, there were things that were, there'd be a WAV file labeled doorbell, but it was actually somebody speaking, so just, you couldn't even take, that like the audio files and the voice files were actually going to be accurate as well. It was really tricky.
So you did pretty much the same thing that you did back in Psychonauts, just listen to all of the audio files and try to categorize them.
I had no time for that. So we tried to touch as little as possible, because we also felt like if we started trying to fix those things, we would break other things. So in a lot of ways, it was like kind of like wrap a shell around some stuff. And, we certainly we updated the art and things, but there were a lot of things that we just couldn't do.
And in Day of the Tentacle, you also noticed that there were certain takes that made it into the game that were spliced from different takes in the master tapes. How did you recreate these files? How did you know where to stop the recording from one take and start the recording from the other?
I really don't know. Okay. Honestly, I mean, it's like, so I didn't do any of those fixes. That would be, Camden or Paul, who would be working on those things. And, they have incredible ears as well. And so, you just like, you do your best and you listen, you A/B the two things, like what shipped in the game, whatever I'm Frankensteining, is it working? Yes or no? And yeah, it's a lot of work. It's an incredible amount of work. And the big takeaway is, how can we better archive as we go? How can we be better about like leaving better breadcrumbs for future us?
LucasArts was a subsidiary of Lucasfilm. So I'm sure that they had vast amounts of knowledge about proper archiving. And unlike Sierra Online, they actually archived stuff like the original artworks and original recordings.
That's a different company.
I know it's a different company, but for example, Sierra Online threw their archives in a landfill. So when they worked on the remaster version of their game, Gabriel Knight, they had a choice between using the original sound files from the original game, which were really low quality, or re-record everything. So they had to re-record everything.
LucasArts also threw things in a dumpster when they moved to the Presidio, and there were some folks that retrieved things from those dumpsters. So that is how we were able to get some things back. I think it's a shame that companies don't put, an emphasis on these kinds of things, because I think we get into the habit of thinking, oh, well, everything's so digital and it's fine. But, there's still a physical accumulation of things that we, whether it's on, at LucasArts. I mean, I was dealing with like zip disks and zip drives, and I think for us to be better about recognizing that just because it's digital doesn't mean it's forever. But it does mean you have to sort of deal with the physical detritus of what we build.
Wait, so in some of the remasters you did, you had to get things from people who got them from dumpsters?
Yeah.
Amazing.
I know.
Now, in 2015, you also attended the Academy Awards with Graham, who was nominated that year. And now, in my conversation with him, he told me all about the wild Hollywood parties he attended. What was your experience on Oscar night?
Just feeling awkward and not comfortable in my skin. It was a weird thing. There's lots of fancy actors and actresses, and there'd be people who would look at you and kind of look you up and down to see if you were important, and then would just keep walking. So in some ways, if I were to ever have to do it again, and I really hope I do not, I would be way more calm about it and just like enjoy the fact that I'm kind of a fly on the wall because nobody cares about animation directors.
Well, as long as it's part of the ceremony, it's important. So don't belittle the whole.
No, I don't. I know I don't want to belittle it. It's just in a lot of ways, like there's people are starstruck, and if they don't recognize you as being somebody famous, then they kind of ignore you, which is fine for me because whatever. I got really good at small talk that year and all of the like award season and all of the parties. I got really good at small talk and chatting with folks and, but it was
about
nice.
The weather and football.
Yeah. No, I don't even know what we would talk about. But then you'd start to see the same people over and over again. And so it was really nice to see familiar faces and feel comfortable. It was a good opportunity to wear vintage dresses. It was great.
In June 2019, Microsoft acquired Double Fine. What was your initial reaction to Tim's announcement of the acquisition? Were you on a Zoom call? Because I didn't see you in Psychonauts.
Yeah, I think I was in a Zoom call at that point. I was not surprised, and I think it gives Tim some peace of mind. Tim is an incredible creative human being, and he functions best when he can stay in that creative space. But as a figurehead in the industry, and as the head of a company that is independent and always needs to go out and get funding, those actions take away from the creative side. And so if he could be acquired, get an acquisition. We got acquired by Microsoft, and that gives us some financial security. It makes perfect sense. And as an independent studio, we are allowed that creative latitude to do the kinds of games that Double Fine has always been known for. Therefore, nothing really changes. It's just that we have that financial security that we didn't have before.
If Microsoft's acquisition of Activision will go through as planned, then Double Fine and Sierra Online would practically be under the same roof. You'll be 2 degrees of King's Quest, or better yet, 2 degrees of Phantasmagoria.
Excellent.
Have you ever played any of the Sierra games?
No.
Well, okay.
As a young kid or in high school, I played Scorched Earth. That was my favorite.
I loved Scorched Earth. And I found the text file in Scorched Earth from which the sentences they'd say to each other, the banter was in that text file. And I would change it. And I felt like a hacker back then.
Oh, that's brilliant. I never did that. But man, I loved that game.
That was an awesome game. I still play it from time to time. It's still awesome.
Okay, I'm going to make a note. Play Scorched Earth, because that would scratch an itch for me.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I love that game.
And since you've got Microsoft money nowadays, you should remake Scorched Earth, but not in 3D. Just make the same thing. And maybe instead of having it done in VR or some fancy thing, just do it with a PC speaker so that it will sound like back then. You'll get a big box, like in the 90s, and a PC speaker inside, a Bluetooth PC speaker that will play the original sounds.
Oh man, that'd be pretty amazing.
I think I'm going to launch a Kickstarter campaign for that game immediately after this conversation.
Excellent.
So don't steal that idea from me.
Okay,
Scorched Earth is mine.
That's yours. You got it.
Now, after the acquisition, the whole world went into disarray with a pandemic. Now, as the pandemic started and everyone started working from home, like you did for the previous 16 years, were you happy that everyone got to experience working from home?
I wouldn't say happy, but I would say that I benefited from better conferencing software and things. And again, because I'm low on the radar. So it was easy to forget to tell me something, right? If you're not there, you don't get that information. And so the fact that suddenly we all have to be conferencing in, and, I was suddenly I felt a lot more closely tied to the things that were happening at the studio again. So I feel like I benefited from it. I wouldn't say that I was happy.
So you benefited from the pandemic. Yeah, sounds much better.
Oh my God, that sounds terrible. Oh my God. No. Okay. Oh my gosh.
Well, it could have been worse. You could have said that you sold overpriced masks to
right.
people on the street.
No.
So you're a level below that.
Thanks. I benefited from better communication with my coworkers.
I benefited from the pandemic. Okay. Psychonauts 2 came out in 2021. And since you were involved as a producer on both Psychonauts 1 and 2, could you share the key differences you observed in how these two games were made, as well as point out any consistent aspects that remained the same during both productions? Now, I understand that with sound files, we already discussed the fact that it was a mess with Psychonauts 1, but in general.
Well, there's a lot that I'm not going to talk about.
Okay.
So give me a minute to figure out a good answer there, because there were differences, and there were same things. So let me see. Well, there were similarities in that we would try stuff and it wouldn't work, right? And that's part of being at a creative studio, is that you try something and it just, no matter how hard you try, it just doesn't come together the way that you thought it might or you hoped it might. And that was true on the first game as well. But there was also, within the studio, there was also this, it was very clear that we needed to keep the fans of the first game happy. We needed to, if we were going to change the locations, if we were going to change the situations, and if we were going to introduce new characters, then we needed to make sure that it still felt like the heart and soul of the first game. And I feel like we did that really well. With the sort of unique and wacky characters that we introduced, but also just like the heartfelt growth, I think, that we saw from Raz. I mean, I still think about that scene with Hollis where after he's like messed around in her mind and he's like, it's okay, I'll pack my things and go. The benefit that I have of being able to listen to that file without anything else going on is that you can actually hear Richard Horvitz's voice like cracking, and there's just such emotion in that read, in that performance that he gave. And we hear that, and we build a game that's full of emotion and growth, I think, just like of understanding. It's many years later, we've tried to grow as humans and as a company to understand mental health issues with a little bit more, softness and support than we may have been, during the first game. And so I do think that we firmly brought it forward, and we did it in a way that still, kept all that humor and the things that people liked about the first game are still there.
And if Microsoft hadn't acquired Double Fine, which parts of the game wouldn't have made it to the final product?
I don't know. I'm sure we would have figured something out, and the game would have come out in some shape. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't think about those things, right? I'm not thinking, oh gosh, if we don't get acquired, this game's going to be terrible. I'm mostly thinking of like, I just want to make this game amazing. And something that I say at Double Fine a lot is that the stuff that we do ends up being greater than the sum of its parts, right? Like, because we have people who are experts and skilled in various disciplines, all giving their best to something. And that adds up to something that is greater than 100%. It is just, there's a magic that happens when we all work together to make these games. It's hard for me to think about not doing that. And so I don't even think about like maybe the bigger company things of like, well, I don't know what Tim's worried about. That's Tim's job. It's not my job. I'm just going to keep making this game.
In 2023, Psychodyssey, the documentary covering the 7-year production period of Psychonauts 2 was released. Did you watch it when it came out? Or did you guys do a group watch at Double Fine?
So before, some months prior to it coming out, Two Player Productions had, links to episodes for those of us internally to watch it. And I got a little bit of the way in, and then it got too painful and I couldn't watch it. I needed a little bit more distance. So I stopped watching. But then when the documentary was actually publicly released, I was like, you know what? All right, let's just do it. And I watched the whole thing in one weekend. And, as much as there were some painful bits to relive, and then some things that I hadn't known because, again, I was off site, and to see those things laid bare so openly, it was hard to see. But at the end, I came away with such a feeling of hope. And again, all the Two Player Productions guys are amazing. And I feel comfortable with them filming me and talking to me. And so it was like, to come away with the feeling of optimism after what we had been through was really amazing and also really healing for me. And I'm really glad that it exists. I'm really glad that they did what they did and shared it with the world.
And as someone who's such a private person, do you feel better now that it's out, or would you have preferred not being filmed at all?
I am totally fine with it. And I'm glad that I was able to contribute in the small ways that I did to that. So I don't mind being a part of it.
And in hindsight, after watching the 2 documentaries made about the day-to-day trials and tribulations at Double Fine, do you feel that the presence of the cameras affected people's behaviors or their decision-making processes?
I don't think so, because again, everybody at Double Fine, it feels like one big family. And if there were people that don't want to be filmed, they have that option. But for those of us who are okay with it, we don't even notice the cameras anymore. And I don't think that people change their behavior. I mean, I think you see some pretty terrible behavior in the documentary, and that's just proof that, we didn't see the cameras. And so you were seeing the real Double Fine.
And how did it work exactly when it came to the confessionals? Did the guys at Two Player Productions pull you aside every time something big happened to get your immediate reaction? Or did you guys voluntarily approach them and let them know that you have something to share?
I actually don't know the answer to that because, again, I was off site. So for me, if they knew that I was coming on site, that they would, if I was going to be visiting, then they would say, hey, we'd love to grab some time while you're here. So in that sense, with me, they would take advantage of the time that I would be there and schedule something with me. But For the other folks that did those kinds of confessionals, I don't know if it was 2-player approaching the subject or if the subject was approaching 2-player productions.
And like I said, you have been working remotely even before the pandemic, which I'm a great advocate of. Don't get me wrong. Do you find it challenging to work remotely as someone who needs to collaborate with numerous team members on various projects at any given time?
It can be challenging, but it also it allows you to really focus. And so, I mean, sure, it's difficult if you need to talk to somebody and they're not at their desk, but there is a little bit of a delay. But sometimes that's okay, because sometimes where I would maybe have a question or whatever, like I can give me a few cycles to spin my brain on my own, and I might come up with a solution on my own. So that's okay. But I will say too that in a lot of ways, like I remember this from the Once Upon a Monster game. Oliver was the lead programmer of that game, and he and I established a really close relationship, and we were just in constant communication about that project as it went through development. And I hadn't been on site in a number of years, and I flew down for something, and there was Oliver, and I'm giving hugs to everybody because they're like, "Oh, it's so great to see you, so great to see you." And I give Oliver a hug, and then we both looked at each other like, we've actually never met in person before, have we? But, we're giving hugs like we've been friends forever, because we have been. And that is the beautiful thing about Double Fine. And also that, despite the distance, you can actually, you can make a real impact and create a real good working relationship, friendship with people, even from afar.
Now, Tim Schafer has stated in the past that some jokes in The Secret of Monkey Island were written at the very last minute, and that they were still adding and changing various jokes up to the day they had to ship the master copies for mass production. Would you like the same flexibility to make such last-minute adjustments in your projects, or do you lean towards a more modern method of scripting, locking it in, recording, and then integrating the voice into the game without any room for changes?
I try to build a lot of flexibility in for Tim, and part of the system that I designed and put into place at Double Fine allows him to make those changes up until a very late stage of development. And that part of it, of why we record throughout, is so that he's not just listening to the voice files all at the end and then having to decide if he likes it or not, right? That's why we do it sort of throughout. And we build in times for, I say, okay, we're going to do one final session of a very small number of lines, and I'll do 1 or 2 characters only. Just because we have to keep it manageable to be able to turn around the translations in time as well. And he's been good about that. So, understanding that beyond him writing something, there's a whole group of people that need to make that get into the game, right? And so it's not just me and, doing voice sessions, and it's not just an animator or a gameplay programmer. There's also audio, like any changes he does, that might impact, like, okay, well, now he's just written something and he wants an explosion to happen. Well, that's now a new visual effect that has to happen. And then after that happens, it needs to be scored, because you can't have a silent explosion in Psychonauts, which I think we did in the first game, unfortunately. So there's a whole host, and he does understand that at a certain point he does need to be hands off, and he's been good about that. Making text only changes on the day that we want to ship, maybe, but I'd like it to be for like a TCR violation. We're, as a company, we want to get better about, closing off sections of the game. And so that, like, most of the people are done and not touching it at all, except if they have to fix something that's absolutely crucial. if there's a voice file that's absolutely crucial, then sure, I hope that never happens.
So which Double Fine project had the most last minute changes?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, they all go through, oh, we got kicked from cert. Okay, well, we got to fix this thing. Okay. I don't know. But they all go, I mean, it's chaotic at the end. No matter how good you are and how careful you are with planning, it is always chaotic at the end because you just never know what is going to happen. What thing is just going to, someday someone's going to find some, like on the last day, find some really bizarre bug. I don't know. They all go through that.
Yeah, but nowadays with digital distribution, it shouldn't be that much of a problem to patch it, even the day after you release the game. So
that is true. I mean, there are a certain amount of things that I think most companies just plan for a day one patch. So, you do your best. And then you just very quickly start, working on fixing those final things so that when players, play the game for the first time, they, get an update as well.
It's not as costly as the 90s when they had to send out patches in the mail.
Right.
And just upload it to Steam.
Right. That's true.
So let me ask differently. Which Double Fine project had the most substantial patch so close to release?
Again, like it's you're asking me to remember things that I've like firmly thrown out of my mind. I'm like, we're done, moving on. I know that Brutal Legend, had a bunch of patches. Psychonauts 2 had a bunch of patches, and then we put out a quality of life patch a few months later. I mean, in recent history, yes, Psychonauts 2 went through a lot of fixes post launch. So maybe that one.
Now, speaking of 2023, you're on sabbatical this year.
Yes, that was
How was your sabbatical?
It was great. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Double Fine has a benefit where if you've been at the company for 10 years or longer, you can get some time off. And it was really, really lovely to just have a summer off. And I thought I would miss, the cute animal pictures that people find on the internet and, the talk about movies and TV. And I kind of missed all that stuff, but I also really liked not doing any of that stuff at all. It was really nice.
So what did you do? Did you binge watch every show on Netflix?
I built a workbench. I started doing some carpentry projects. So I did that. I planted some trees. I sat on my porch. I built a porch last year and then I sat on it this year.
So every time you go on vacation or sabbatical, you actually build something physical?
I think so.
And while you're working, you're building something digital?
Yeah.
That's okay.
I think that's, for me, like, what we build is digital. And yet I have always liked to be hands-on with things. And so I knew that this summer I wanted to do just a lot of work with my hands. So, working in the garden, building stuff with power tools. It was really good to just do that.
Maybe teams should commission you to build new desks for Double Fine.
Oh, we have good
Actual
desks.
desk.
I don't need to build. No.
Now, before we conclude our conversation, I have a few questions from our viewers.
Okay.
Simistash asks, considering production is the healthy balance between business and creativity, what would be the biggest challenge in game development nowadays?
Wow. Biggest challenge in game development. Well, I think we all understand that the pandemic has had a major impact on our lives and disrupted things in ways that were unhealthy, but also possibly healthy as well. We learned that you can work offsite. I mean, I've been offsite for 18 years. But I think you have to think about what are conversations that need to happen with everyone together, and what kinds of decisions can be made asynchronously. And then how are you really, how are you really intentful, I guess, is that a word, with your communication, right? So how is it making sure that, if you have Slack, right, it's one thing to just type your thing and send your message and like, well, I did my thing. But if other people don't read it or they're not in that channel, right? So you have to really be meaningful with your communication, especially as teams are now spread far and wide and across different time zones. And so it's how do you find ways to just think about the kinds of information that information that needs to happen in a meeting, and other information that can sort of, be documented and then just worked on asynchronously as people have the time to, participate, I guess. So it's kind of teasing apart this spider web of communication. And also, it's hard, at Double Fine, you could just look over your shoulder and see what cool things people are working on. And you can't do that now. So you have to find ways of being able to share those kind of moments in ways that, aren't as organic as they once were. So those are challenges and interesting problems to solve.
Or you could wait a few years and watch a documentary about that same period and see what people were actually working on.
Right.
Bashar asks, if you could take Raz to a brain of your choice, which would it be?
That is such a good question. Well, I think Raz has been in my brain since the early days of me being at Double Fine. And I think, and it's part of the reason why I was, so excited to go back to that world of Psychonauts first with the Rhombus of Ruin, and then with Psychonauts 2. It was just that these characters mean so much to me. So, but what sort of fanciful brain oh my gosh, there's so many possibilities of where you could put Raz and the amazing things that would happen. But I guess I'd like to know what he would do in my brain.
Digma Gamma asks, could you share any unusual or intriguing stories from your work on localizations, specifically ones that relate to differences in language or culture and came up during the collaborative work, or that ended up affecting the product in interesting ways? Now, we've mentioned some.
I have another one, though.
Any other?
One of my favorites is, this is this is a window into the world that I deal with on a daily basis. I feel like this is Double Fine through and through. Working on stacking, and the translators have the script, and there's a reference to a Dutch oven, and all of the other characters are laughing, and the translators ask me, "We don't understand why this is a joke." And it's like, okay. In my job, I now have to explain, what a Dutch oven is, and I'm like, I'm typing, I'm trying to be really polite about it, of like, okay, what's covers over the head? Okay, all right, okay. I'm like, erase
Send them
it.
a clip from Family Guy.
Well, this was, I don't know if that had happened. I don't know if that happened before or after. Anyway, I went to urbandictionary.com and I was like, see, definition number 3. I'm sorry. So there you go.
Just send it on your phone and then throw your phone away.
So that is one of my favorites. But there are definitely things that have come up, and you do your best, right? And actually one of the best things that I asked Double Fine for and that they gave me was a subscription to the Oxford English Dictionary. Because a lot of times when Tim makes up words, you want to be able to look up the history of the, sort of root words, if you will, and find ways, because to sort of explain with a deeper emphasis on the kind of like history of certain words, and especially like play on words and puns and things of that nature. So, there's a lot of explaining I have to do, and that's fine. I would rather be asked than not asked at all.
Well, you can be sure that they'll never forget what a Dutch oven is from that point on.
I'm sure.
Once you have that interaction in a professional email, then you know that you'll never forget it.
Right.
Now, one last question from me. What are your plans for 2024? And I know that I ask all my guests that question, so I'm going to ask you as well, although I know the answer. But how can people stay in touch with you and your work?
You can get in touch with Double Fine.
What's Malena doing today?
I was participating for a while on our Discord. I don't know if we still have a public Discord. Maybe we do.
You still have a public Discord, and the last time you wrote something on that public Discord was 2018, which is immediately after the moment you joined that Discord. So no, you're not writing on the Double Fine Discord.
All right. Well, maybe if your listeners would want me to, then I would make an effort to do that. I feel like my work is like, it's great if people are interested in hearing about the kinds of things that I do, but I am just one person in an organization of really wonderful, talented artists and programmers and designers and audio people. I mean, I'm just one of many. And the work that I do is, for Double Fine. So it feels weird for me to be like, yeah, and I'm just part of the thing. I don't know. But sure, if people want to get in touch with me, I'm sure they can reach out to our community manager. And if they have questions about what it is that I do, I also like to help people as they are entering this industry or whatnot. So yeah, if get in touch with our community managers and you have questions about what it is that I do, I would be happy to help people.
So the answer I got was A, you're super humble, and B, they need to wait for the next Two Player Productions documentary to see what you were working on in 2023. And hopefully they'll know in 2028 what you were working on in secret all these years.
Well, yeah, I mean, 2024 is going to be a good and exciting year for Double Fine, but I can't talk about anything. I mean, it's always, every year is good and exciting. I've got 19 of them that have been good and exciting. So when Double Fine is ready to share those plans with the world, then you'll have a window into what it is that I'm doing in 2024.
But is it better and exciting-er than other years?
Well, I'm working on some stuff that I'm really excited about. It's true. It is true. And I can't actually talk about it at all. And I do stuff that's like not even game related, and I'm super excited about that too. So I don't know. I like it's a fun and exciting job, and it keeps me busy.
Well, at least we invented two words in this conversation. You invented intentful, I invented exciting-er, and that's it.
That's perfect.
We're done for the day.
All right, we'll get those into the Oxford English Dictionary, and then that'll be perfect.
Well, thank you so much, Malena, for hanging out and chatting with me today. It's
been
an absolute
Daniel.
Pleasure.
This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much for peeling back the curtain on me and getting a chance to just chat about what it is that I do. Thank you so much.
And see you in 2028 in Psychodyssey 2.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you, Malena.
Thank you.